Not every person who changes your life is meant to stay in it, and not every person who leaves was a mistake. Carl Jung understood something about human connection that most people spend years learning the hard way. He knew that certain relationships exist to transform you permanently, to reshape the structure of who you are at the deepest level, but he also knew that transformation comes in two very different forms. Some connections are meant to walk beside you for the rest of your life, and some are meant to break you open, teach you something you could not have learned any other way, and then end. The problem is that both types feel equally intense. Both shake you. Both keep you up at night. Both feel like destiny. And in the middle of it, when your emotions are running at full volume and your unconscious is projecting at maximum power, it is almost impossible to tell which one you are in. And this is where most people make a costly error. They assume that intensity equals permanence. They believe that the depth of what they feel is proof that the connection is meant to last forever. So when a teaching connection ends, they experience it as a catastrophic failure rather than a completed purpose. They spend months, sometimes years, trying to resurrect something that was never meant to be permanent. Not because the love was not real, but because the love had a different assignment than the one they imagined. But Jung identified clear patterns, psychological signatures that distinguish a connection meant to last from one meant to teach. And once you see these patterns, you will not only understand your current relationships differently, you will finally make peace with the ones that ended. This is the follow-up to our previous video on the 3 patterns Jung observed in destined connections. If you have not seen that one, I will leave it linked. But you do not need it to understand what we are about to cover, because today we are answering the question that video left open, the question that was sitting in the back of your mind. How do you actually tell the difference? There are 4 signs, and the 4th one is the one that will reframe everything. The first sign has to do with how conflict operates inside the relationship, and it reveals something most people completely misunderstand about arguments with the person they love. Jung spent decades studying what he called complexes. These are emotionally charged clusters of memories, beliefs, and reactions that live in your unconscious and activate automatically when triggered. You do not choose when a complex fires. It simply takes over. Your voice changes, your body tenses. You say things that feel like they are coming from somewhere older and deeper than the present moment. Because they are. In every close relationship, your complexes will collide with the other person's complexes. That is unavoidable. The question is, what happens after the collision? In a connection that is meant to teach you, the conflicts repeat. The same argument resurfaces every few weeks or months, wearing slightly different clothes but carrying the same emotional charge. You fight about dishes, but you are really fighting about respect. You argue about time apart, but you are really arguing about abandonment. The surface details change. The underlying wound never moves. Jung would have recognized this as repetition compulsion operating inside the relationship, a pattern where both people unconsciously recreate the same dynamic because neither has integrated the complex driving it. The relationship becomes a stage where the same scene plays on loop. And no matter how much you love each other, the script never changes. In a connection that is meant to last, something fundamentally different happens. The conflicts evolve. The first argument about trust is painful and messy, but something shifts afterward, not because someone won the argument, but because one or both people gained awareness. The next time that wound gets activated, the reaction is slightly different. There is a pause where there used to be an explosion. There is a question where there used to be an accusation. The complex still fires, but the conscious mind catches it a fraction of a second faster. Over months and years, the conflicts in a lasting connection do not disappear. They transform. They become doorways rather than walls. Each disagreement leaves both people with a slightly deeper understanding of themselves and each other. The relationship does not avoid pain. It metabolizes pain into growth. If you look at a connection in your life and the same core conflict has been circling for years without any evolution, without any new awareness emerging from it, that is not a sign of deep love being tested. That is a sign that the teaching is complete and the lesson is being ignored. The connection delivered its message, but neither person opened the envelope. And here is what makes this painful. The love can be completely real while the purpose is completely finished. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that the relationship has taught everything it came to teach. Letting go in that case is not a betrayal of the love. It is an honoring of the lesson. But if you look at a connection and you can trace how the arguments changed you, how the version of you that fights today is more conscious, more honest, more capable of repair than the version that fought a year ago. If you can see that the conflicts, as painful as they were, actually moved something inside both of you, that is one of the strongest indicators Jung's framework gives us that this connection carries the architecture for something lasting. The second sign involves what happens when the initial intensity fades, and this is where most people make their biggest mistake. In our previous video, we discussed Jung's concept of the anima and animus, the unconscious blueprint of an ideal counterpart that every person carries. When you meet someone who closely matches this blueprint, your psyche does not just feel attraction, it feels recognition. And that recognition produces an intensity that can feel almost supernatural. But here is what Jung observed about that intensity. It always fades, in every connection, without exception. Because the intensity is not coming from the other person, it is coming from your projection onto them. The critical question is what remains when the projection lifts. In a connection that is meant to teach you, the withdrawal of the projection feels like falling out of love. The person who once seemed to glow with an almost magical quality suddenly looks ordinary. The conversations that felt electric now feel flat. You start noticing flaws that were always there, but that the projection made invisible. And you feel a specific kind of disappointment that is hard to describe. Not anger, not even sadness exactly. More like waking from a vivid dream and realizing the room you are in looks nothing like the one you were just inhabiting. This is not a tragedy. This is the teaching completing itself. The projection showed you qualities you desperately need to develop within yourself. Creativity, emotional courage, groundedness, passion, tenderness, whatever it was that you saw in them and fell in love with. The connection's purpose was to make you aware of those qualities, to show you what your psyche is hungry for. Now the work of actually cultivating them is yours to do, alone. In a connection that is meant to last, the withdrawal of the projection feels completely different. The intensity fades, yes, the intoxication softens, but underneath it, something quieter and far more durable is revealed. You see the real person, genuinely see them, with their flaws and contradictions and rough edges, and instead of disappointment, you feel something that Jung considered one of the hallmarks of psychological maturity. You feel choice, not compulsion, not need, not the desperate gravity of an unconscious projection pulling you toward someone, but a calm, clear, eyes wide open decision. I see who you actually are, not the version I invented, not the projection I needed you to be. You, and I choose you anyway. Jung believed this transition from projection to conscious choice is one of the most difficult psychological passages a human being can make. Most people never complete it. They either chase the intensity forever, moving from one projection to the next, or they settle into relationships where the projection was never strong enough to cause real disruption, but also never strong enough to produce real growth. The connections that last are the ones where both people survive the death of the fantasy and discover that what remains, the real, imperfect, fully human relationship, is actually more meaningful than the projection ever was. The love after the projection falls is quieter, less dramatic. It does not make your heart race the way the early days did. But it does something the projection never could. It sees the other person, actually sees them. And that, Jung believed, is where real intimacy begins. Not in the fantasy. In the aftermath of the fantasy. If you are in a relationship that recently lost its spark, its initial magic, do not assume that means the connection is dying. It might mean the connection is finally being born. The real one. The one between two actual human beings instead of two projections wearing human costumes. The third sign is about what Jung called individuation, and specifically about the direction each person's growth takes inside the relationship. Individuation is Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. Not the version of you that your parents wanted, not the version that society approved of, not the mask you wear at work or the role you perform in your family. The actual, integrated whole version of yourself that exists beneath all of that. Jung observed that in every significant relationship, both people's individuation processes interact. They influence each other. They either support each other's becoming, or they quietly suffocate it. In a connection that is meant to teach you, there is often a painful asymmetry. One person is growing rapidly, the other is resisting. One is peeling back layers, confronting their shadow, becoming more honest and more alive. The other is doubling down on old defenses, old patterns, old ways of being that no longer fit. You might have lived this. You start therapy, or you have a personal breakthrough, or something cracks open inside you and you begin changing in ways that feel essential and irreversible. And the person you love looks at this new version of you with something between confusion and fear. They liked the old version. The old version was predictable. The old version did not ask difficult questions or set uncomfortable boundaries. This divergence is not anyone's fault. Jung would not frame it as one person being more evolved than the other. He would say their individuation timelines are misaligned. They are being called in different directions at different speeds, and the connection, which was vital for igniting the growth, cannot sustain the weight of two people moving at fundamentally different paces. The teaching is in the departure. The lesson is learning that you cannot slow your own becoming to keep someone comfortable, and you cannot drag someone into growth they are not ready for, no matter how much you love them. Some of the most loving thing you will ever do is release someone whose path has diverged from yours, not with resentment, not with blame, with the quiet recognition that the container you shared together has done its work, and continuing to pour into it will only drown you both. Jung never romanticized this. He understood that outgrowing a connection can feel like grief, because it is grief. You are mourning not just the person, but the future you imagined together, the version of reality where your paths stayed parallel forever. Letting that go requires a kind of psychological courage that most people underestimate. In a connection that is meant to last, individuation moves in tandem, not identically, not at the same speed on the same day, but in a complementary rhythm, like two musicians playing different instruments in the same key. One person's growth creates space for the others. When she becomes more assertive, he does not feel threatened. He feels invited to examine his own relationship with passivity. When he opens up emotionally, she does not feel burdened. She feels permission to go deeper into her own vulnerability. The relationship becomes what Jung would call an alchemical container, a space where both people's raw psychological material, their shadows, their projections, their fears, their unlived potential, can be held and slowly transformed, not by the other person doing the work for them, but by the relationship itself providing the heat and the safety required for the transformation to occur. If you are in a connection where your growth consistently inspires the other person's growth, where becoming more yourself makes the relationship stronger rather than more strained, pay attention to that. It is rarer than you think, and it is one of the clearest signs Jung's framework offers that a connection has lasting architecture. Now, the fourth sign, the one I said, would reframe everything, and it has to do with what happens when you are apart. This is the sign that most people get exactly backwards, because we have been taught that missing someone intensely is proof that they are meant for you. that the more it hurts to be away from them, the more real the connection must be. Jung would have challenged that assumption completely. He observed that separation activates different psychological responses depending on the nature of the connection. And the quality of what you feel in someone's absence reveals more about the connection's purpose than anything you feel in their presence. In a connection that is meant to teach you, separation produces a specific kind of ache. It feels like something has been taken from you, like a part of your identity is missing. You feel incomplete. You might find yourself unable to focus, unable to enjoy things you used to enjoy, unable to feel fully like yourself without their presence. The world feels dimmer, flatter, like someone turned down the color. This feels like proof of destiny, but Jung would identify it as something else entirely. Participation mystique, a state where your sense of self has become so entangled with another person that you literally cannot locate yourself without them. Your identity was partially outsourced to the relationship, and now that the relationship is gone, you do not know who you are. This is not love. This is unconscious fusion, and the teaching embedded in this kind of separation is perhaps the most important one. You are being forced to find, within yourself, everything you believed only they could give you. Wholeness, aliveness, meaning, purpose. The connection had to end because it was preventing you from discovering that these things were always yours. In a connection that is meant to last, separation feels fundamentally different. And this is the part that surprises most people. You miss them. Of course you miss them. But the missing does not diminish you. It does not make you less yourself. If anything, the time apart makes you more yourself. You find yourself reflecting, growing, integrating lessons. You think about them, and instead of aching with need, you feel something warmer and steadier. Gratitude, anticipation, a quiet confidence that the connection is not threatened by distance because it is not dependent on proximity to survive. You remain whole in their absence. And here is the paradox. That wholeness is exactly what makes the reunion possible. Because when two people can be fully themselves apart, they can be fully present together. There is no desperate grasping, no anxious monitoring, no fear that the other person will disappear. Just two complete individuals whose lives are richer for being shared. Jung believed this was the ultimate test. Not how intensely you burn for someone, but how completely you can stand on your own and still choose to walk beside them. If separation makes you collapse, the connection was scaffolding, necessary for a time, but not meant to be permanent. If separation makes you grow while the bond quietly endures, you are looking at something built on the deepest possible foundation. Two individuated people choosing each other not from need, but from wholeness. And this changes the entire conversation about destiny. Because Jung's version of destiny was never about two incomplete people finding their missing half. It was about two people who are each doing the work of becoming whole and discovering that their wholeness is more powerful together than apart. Not because they need each other to function, but because what they create together, the depth of understanding, the quality of presence, the capacity for honest love, exceeds what either could build alone. That is what a lasting connection looks like through the lens of Jungian psychology. Not effortless, not painless, not the absence of conflict or doubt or fear, but the presence of evolution. Two people who keep choosing growth, keep choosing honesty, keep choosing each other, not because it is easy, but because something in the deepest layer of their psyche recognizes that this connection is where their becoming unfolds. And if you are listening to this and realizing that a connection you lost was meant to teach rather than to last, hear this clearly. That does not make it less meaningful. Teaching connections are not failed, lasting connections. They are complete in themselves. They did exactly what they were meant to do. They broke open a part of you that needed breaking. They showed you something you could not have seen alone. And the person you are now, the awareness you carry, the depth you have access to, exists because that connection happened. Not every transformation requires a lifetime. Some of the most important ones happen in a season, in a single conversation, in one moment of being truly seen by someone who could not stay, but whose seeing changed everything. The brevity does not diminish the significance. If anything, it concentrates it. A teaching connection is a concentrated dose of exactly what your psyche needed at exactly the moment it needed it. That is not a lesser form of destiny. That is destiny in its most efficient form. The question is never whether a connection was real. If it changed you, it was real. The question is what kind of real it was. And now you have the framework to answer that. If this gave you a new way to understand a relationship you have been carrying, subscribe to this channel. We explore the deepest ideas in psychology, the ones that actually change how you live, not just what you know. Hit the notification bell, because next we are going into Jung's framework for shadow work, the actual process of integrating everything these connections reveal about you. Now I want to hear from you. Looking at these 4 signs, which one made you rethink a specific connection in your life? Was it a connection meant to last, or one that was meant to teach? Your answer might help someone else in this community make sense of their own experience. Drop it in the comments.